The Knights Templar were a medieval Christian military order founded in the early 12th century. Initially established to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, they quickly grew in wealth and influence, becoming one of the most powerful organizations in Europe. The Templars accumulated vast riches through donations, bequests, and successful business ventures. Some scholars even argue they founded the first banking system, due to their business of offering loans and storing funds, treasures, documents, and other assets. However, their wealth and influence attracted the envy and suspicion of secular authorities, particularly in France. King Philip IV, heavily indebted to the Templars, saw an opportunity to eliminate his financial obligations while also seizing their wealth for himself. In 1307, Philip launched a coordinated attack against the Templars, accusing them of heresy, blasphemy, and other crimes. On Friday, October 13, 1307, hundreds of Templars were arrested across France, including their Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. Under torture, many Templars confessed to false charges, leading to a widespread condemnation of the order. In 1312, the Pope disbanded the Knights Templar and their assets were seized by the French crown. The Templar banking empire collapsed primarily due to this persecution, and the blind eye the papacy turned towards it due to pressures from the heavily militarized Kingdom of France. Pope Clement V, who was very close to death by an unknown disease, which many scholars believe to be a form of cancer, did very little to stop the French, and, at times, overtly suppressed the Templars. With their leaders imprisoned or executed, their assets confiscated, and their reputation tarnished, the Templars were effectively dismantled as an organization. But what if this had changed? What if, in an alternate timeline, Pope Clement V defended the Templars against persecution? As the sun dipped below the horizon, the grand square of Paris transformed into a theater of power and fear. Citizens gathered in hushed clusters, their eyes fixed on the imposing figure of King Philip IV as he ascended the steps of the Notre Dame Cathedral, flanked by his retinue of armored guards. August 1270, a date long past, but not long forgotten, still lingered in the king's memory like a festering wound, a year stained with the blood of crusaders lost in a futile campaign. The death of his grandfather on that ill-fated 1270 expedition had left a bitter legacy, fueling Philip's resentment towards the knights who had promised glory but delivered only despair. With a wave of his hand, the king's decree echoed through the square, carried on the evening breeze like a harbinger of doom. The Templars, once revered as valiant defenders of Christendom, now stood accused of heresy and corruption, their very names synonymous with treachery. The crowd murmured in disbelief, casting wary glances at the imposing edifice of the Templar headquarters looming nearby. Armed soldiers surged forward as they began to dismantle the symbols of Templar power, tearing down banners and sealing the doors with chains. Philip stepped back to his ministers and guards, now reassured that his kingdom would no longer remain indebted to the Templars. Throughout the towns of France, Templar were convicted and sentenced to be burnt at the stake publicly, an example to all those who challenged the political authority of the king. As word reached Rome and the Templars scrambled to escape the Kingdom of France, the Pope Clement V found himself in a particularly sticky situation. He could allow the French to persecute the defenders of Christendom and watch as hundreds of innocent martyrs were created, or he could challenge the strongest military in Europe, a nation whose influence stretched throughout the Church on every level, and risk losing his influence over the West. In Paris, just as suddenly as the news had hit the populace, the heavy oak doors to Philip's chambers creaked open, and a messenger clad in the robes of the papal court strode into the chamber. He approached the throne with a sense of urgency, his eyes darting nervously around the room. The messenger bowed before producing a sealed parchment, bearing the unmistakable seal of the Pope. Philip glared slightly, his hand steepled as he accepted the letter, breaking the seal with a swift motion. As he read its contents, a frown creased the king's mouth. His advisors leaned in. The Pope's words were clear and unequivocal. Cease the persecution of the Templars, or face the wrath of the Church. But King Philip's eyes narrowed with suspicion, his grip tightening on the parchment. He scoffed derisively, dismissing the warning as the feeble protestations of a corrupt clergy swayed by Templar gold. In his mind, the Church reported to him, not to the Pope. With a wave of his hand, the king signaled his defiance, his decision sealed. The messenger bowed deeply and retreated from the chamber. Outside the walls of the Tuileries Palace, the streets buzzed with activity as rumors spread like wildfire. The fate of the Templars hung in the balance, their once vaunted order now facing the full might of the French crown. Back in Rome, Pope Clement V sat upon his ornate throne, his frail form shrouded in the shadows of impending death. The weight of his office bore heavily upon him, his once proud visage now marked by the ravages of an unknown disease that gnawed at his very soul. The Pope grappled with the weight of his responsibilities. His allegiance to France, vague though it may be, the political powers of Europe, and the sanctity of the Church clashed like turbulent seas in his troubled mind. In his final days, Pope Clement had to come to a stark realization. The corruption that festered within the ranks of the Church threatened to consume it from within. The Templar debacle served as a damning indictment of the Church's moral authority, a stain upon its sacred legacy that could not be ignored. With trembling hands, the Pope reached for the parchment before him, its surface adorned with the sacred seal of the Church. In a voice weakened by illness, he dictated his final decree, a solemn vow to root out the rot that had infested the very heart of Christendom. As the quill scratched across the parchment, Pope Clement resolved to do whatever it took to restore the Church's authority over the kingdoms of Europe. No longer would he cower in the shadow of secular power, nor bow to the whims of kings and princes who sought to bend the Church to their will. With a sense of grim determination, Clement sealed the decree with the signet of St. Peter, and as the darkness of the night descended upon the Vatican, Pope Clement bowed his head in silent prayer, his soul burdened by the weight of his decision. The next morning, Pope Clement addressed the assembled clergy. The news of Templar persecution spread throughout the Church. Clement had dispatched messengers to the Holy Roman Empire and to the courts of England, beseeching their aid. From the far reaches of Christendom, warriors and soldiers flocked to the Pope's banner, their hearts burning with zeal for the Christian cause. Within the shattered confines of the Templar fortresses in France, the surviving knights prepared for battle. Armed to the teeth and fortified by centuries of martial tradition, those who hadn't already surrendered stood ready to defy the might of King Philip's forces and reclaim their honor. They received a message from Rome which informed them that the Pope himself had pardoned all members of the Templar from execution. With this spark, the Templars sprung into action, preparing for the impending battle. As the sun rose over the yellow and lavender fields of France, the combined might of the Papal army and the Templar knights assembled on the battlefield. With a thunderous roar, they charged forth, their swords gleaming in the light of dawn as they clashed with the French army. The battle was ferocious. The French were the most equipped and trained of the European powers of the time, and they fought with an inhuman order and discipline. Their archers rained floods of arrows upon the enemy forces, but even as the tide of battle turned against them, the defenders of the Templar stood resolute, their courage undimmed by the onslaught of their foes. Then, in a moment of divine intervention, Pope Clement himself, sickly and weak, emerged from the ranks of the army. Despite his frail composure, his presence was a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. Upon the sight of the Pope on the battlefield which they were fighting against, some of the Frenchmen fled, others turned on their fellow soldiers, and the rest fought valiantly onward. The hastily assembled armies of the Holy Roman State soon emerged to accompany the Papal forces, turning the tide of battle against the remaining French soldiers. The French army, having started at a size of around 15,000 soldiers, was now reduced to about 12,000, and the coalition of about 5,000 Templars and 7,000 soldiers from the forces of the Holy Roman Empire overwhelmed the French defenders after a long and arduous battle. Several days later, the coalition arrived in Paris. Clement ordered the Templars to arrest King Philip. Clement crowned Robert II of Artois, now Robert the Exile, as the new King of France. He then moved to reorganize the Templars into the defenders of the Church once more, and rebuild their banking empire to protect the finances of Europe. This would be his last decree, as, within a week, Clement would pass away from his illness. As military standards increased across Europe, the time came for the new Pope, John XXII, to act upon the ambitions set by Clement. Pope John was under increasing pressure from his European allies and an unexpected friend. A Uyghur monk, Rabban Bar Sama, originally from the Yuan dynasty of China, presented an offer to Rome to ally with his master, Arghun Khan of the Mongol Ilkhanate. Arghun sought to join a Mongol-European alliance to fight against their common enemy, the Mamluks. In return, Arghun offered to return Jerusalem to the Christians once it was recaptured. John sent an envoy of nobles and soldiers to return with Sama to coordinate with the Mongols. The air sparked with anticipation as Crusader armies assembled outside the walls of Acre. Pope John XXII had answered the call to arms, forging an unprecedented alliance between the powers of Christendom and the Mongol Ilkhanate in a bold crusade against the Mamluks. Soldiers and knights from across Christendom converged on the ancient port city. The Templars, resplendent in their white surcoats adorned with the iconic Red Cross, stood shoulder to shoulder with their French and Aragonese allies, their swords gleaming in the Mediterranean sun. Soldiers from the Holy Roman Empire and other smaller Christian kingdoms assisted the massive Crusader army. Further back, deep in the deserts of the Levant, the Mongol contingent under Rabban Bar Sama made their presence known. Clad in exotic armor and weapons, the Mongol horsemen added a formidable edge to the Crusader host, their reputation as fearsome warriors preceding them. The final preparations were made for the assault on Acre, and the attack was ignited. With a mighty roar, the Crusader host surged forward, their battle cries echoing off the ancient walls of the city as they launched their attack on the Mamluk defenders. The clash of steel and the thunder of hooves filled the air as Templars and their allies fought tooth and nail to breach the city defenses. The Mongol cavalry unleashed their fury upon the Mamluk ranks, their swift and deadly strikes cutting through enemy lines like a scythe through wheat. For days, the siege raged on, each side locked in a desperate struggle for supremacy, but in the end, there was no defeating the combined armies of the Ilkhanate and Christendom. As the gates of Acre fell and the city was reclaimed, the faith and valor of the Templars were finally reinvigorated in the eyes of all who beheld them. Even after the defeat of the Mamluks, as the reclaimed lands of the Levant battled among themselves between those who pledged to Rome, those to Constantinople, and those to the Mongols, the Templar remained. Whether a force of military might or financial transaction, their epic would not be soon forgotten. Thank you so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We have new videos like this one every week, so be sure to subscribe and stay tuned. A special thanks to everyone who has donated to us on Patreon and through channel memberships on the main channel. Support from our patrons and donors helps make regular videos possible, and every donation goes a long way to keeping our channels going. If you can't donate anything, please consider subscribing on here and on our main channel, and sharing this video to help out. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video. Mr. Z out.